This is a demonstration of web-enabling CICS COM area programs using CICS 5.1 with the web container based on Liberty technology and Eclipse with the CICS Explorer. You see we're in the web perspective at this point, and we're creating a new project which is a simple dynamic web project. And as you can see, we are not going to create an ear because we are going to deploy directly to a Liberty environment. So as we open up our project, we can see that there is no Java resource yet, and that there is nothing of significance to us currently in the web content. So before we get started, we need to add a few external jars to our build path so that we can make use of CICS Explorer and JZOS functionality. So we come in and add external jars for the CICS server, the record, and the JZOS. Now that these jars have been added, we can go and start by providing a web page which will prompt us for a user ID and password. This is needed because the program we are web enabling is a login program, and these are the inputs to the program which we'll need to move to the COM area. So we're calling this index.html. It's a small app, and this will be the only web page in it. You'll see a hybrid view comes up with both the HTML and the visible portion of the page. We're starting by modifying the title, showing that we're doing this in Raleigh, etc. Just typical stuff you might see on an HTML page without the truly designer's eye to it. And we're going to put the same string as our page title so that it'll be visible to the person running the application. Now what we're going to do is create a form that will prompt for the input we need in order to make this happen. So you'll notice we're setting up an action of JC logon. We'll see later how we actually map to that. And we're saying method get, but it could work with get or post just the same. Now we extend the form and we start putting in input fields. And the input fields are of course going to be a user ID, which is of type text. Now you'll notice the name here is going to be very important as we retrieve this information later. We're giving it a value of a number, which our user IDs are actually very simple, and they are actually numbers. So since the password is going to look very similar, we're just going to cut and paste this line and create the password line. And what you notice up above is the fields are actually next to each other, and we're going to use line breaks to split them up. But first we are changing our name and our ID. ID is an optional field, but it's very good if you ever use JavaScript or anything along those lines. So here we are putting in our line breaks. And then finally what we're going to need is a submit button. So this is going to be an input of type submit. The name and ID will be submit. And then we're going to use a value such that we can put a little bit of local flair, if you will, onto the button itself. And that's all there is to the HTML page. Nothing CICS or even Java specific about this. It's just a page with a small form that's going to prompt us for a user ID and a password. So next we're going to talk about the record object. We compile our COBOL programs with the AData option so that SYSA data is saved, which is, if you will, a form of a listing. And that is used by JZOS tools in order to access the COM area without having to worry about offsets and encoding, etc., etc. So to get started, we're creating a Java package. And then within this package, we're going to create a class to represent our record class, which is going to be specifically for the login, which again was generated by JZOS. Now the generation created this as an external file, so we're just going to go out and capture the text of that file and cut and paste it into here. So here's the file as generated, and we are going to cut and paste. Now we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we didn't write the class, and we would never write a class just like this if it can be generated. What we will show though is that if you scroll down, you'll notice that there are getters and setters, which makes populating as well as querying the COM area extremely simple and extremely intuitive from a Java perspective. So coming back here, we've now got our logon record. Now let's go out and create the POJO that is actually going to interface over to CICS using JavaCICS. We've got a similar POJO in a different application. So here we are, we're going to grab that POJO, make a copy of it, and bring it into our package, our application and our package. So before we use it, we're going to go ahead and rename it to something more relevant here. So basically the login wrapper for CICS. And because there's an error in there, it gives us an extra prompt. The error is because we're trying to access a class that is not local to us. So here we are in the class. And the first thing is they actually had used a COBOL, a record class as well called accountRec. Well, we obviously don't have that, so the compiler is having an issue with that. So we're going to come back and switch it from accountRec to our record, which is the logon rec. The next item here is, well, we're changing the method to the logon method, which will take a string user ID and a string password. Next item here is just the name of the method which is used in our logging method, so we're just going to switch that to be the correct name of the method. Next item is the name of the program. This is a CICS server construct, and we are just going to rename the program from what was relevant there to what was relevant here, in our case logon program, using Eclipse refactoring. So we are then going to instantiate our record, and here's where we have the logon record, and we're going to name it logonrec. So moving on down, we are seeing here that we're getting a CICS task. We actually are not going to use that, although there are certain cases where you would want to. In our case, though, we need to use it. We need to get the task so that we're basically telling CICS that we're about to use JavaCICS. Now what we're doing is we're setting up our program, setting the name to logon, which is the same name as is in the CSD in CICS. And before we drive the program, what we're going to need to do is populate the COM area. So we're using content assist, and in this case we're setting the customer ID to the user ID that was passed into this method, and we're setting the password to the password that was sent into this method. Now of course we have yet to do the servlet, which will retrieve those two fields, but we'll get to that next. So we're going to create a log record on the way out, which is going to tell us a little bit about at least the return code from our call over to CICS. And so of course we're going to return our get logon flags, which happens to be the return code here. That's just something that will show up in the logs on our Liberty server. And then we're going to return the logon rec. A more professional method might have created a Java bean specific to this, or possibly returned a hash map. But in our case, logon rec will work fine for this demo. So the next thing we're actually going to do is create the servlet, which is going to be the link between that HTML page and the POJO, the JavaCICS program that we created. Now you'll notice he's called JC Logon, which is not the correct case based on what the HTML page specified. And that's where we're going to talk a little bit about annotation here, because the later versions of Java have added enough annotation that they actually discourage use of the web XML if you don't actually need it. So in our annotation, we are going to specify the name JCLogon as well as the next field, which is called URL patterns. And this will be a set. In our case, it will just contain one item, but it's the set of the URL patterns as you would see them in web.xml. So there is our annotation, so that this is the servlet that will be called when index.html runs. We're not doing anything specific in the constructor, so we're going to get rid of that. And our doGet and our doPut, because of web container functionality provided to us, really are going to do the same thing. So if doPost is called, we are going to just drive doGet. Finally here, let's put our actual functionality into doGet. So the first thing we need to do in order to drive the JavaCICS program is to instantiate it. So the first thing we're going to do is create an object of type, of the type of our Pojo that will be doing the interface over to CICS. The next thing we need to do is to drive the login method of that class. And we know that that's going to return a logon record, so we're going to create a logon record, which is going to be the return from the call to the logon method of that class. Now we need to specify a user ID and password. Well, they came in via parameters on the request object. So what we're going to do is we're going to use, again, content assist, and we're going to say request.getParameter, and we need to know the name of the fields in the HTML. In this case, they were user ID and password. So we are pulling user ID for that first string, and then again getting another parameter, which will be password for the second string. So what we just did is we actually drove the code. We have now driven CICS. We have done everything necessary to drive CICS. But we have all the output in this record class, and we need to render that. And the typical way we're going to do that, we're going to do it the typical way, which is to use a JSP. So what we need to do first is point the JSP to this record class that we created as if it were a Java bean. So to do that, we're going to do a request.set attribute. You'll notice here that we're using the key logonRec, and that's going to need to be known by the JSP because he's going to pull that same string. And then finally, we're going to invoke the JSP. Now you'll notice we haven't created the JSP, but that's done in the next step. And the invocation can be done in a lot of different ways. We're going to do a sort of quick and dirty where we get the servlet config, which is going to get us the servlet context, which is going to get us the request dispatcher. And you'll notice in the request dispatcher we need to give it a JSP name. So of course we need to make sure that whatever we specify here is the actual name of the JSP that we create. And of course it would help if I had put it in quotes. And then we need to show what we're passing in, which is the request and response object. And again, using content assist, that becomes quite simple. So at this point, as we save this, the servlet is done. It of course won't run quite correctly because the JSP doesn't exist. And that's where we're going to move over and create the JSP now and add it into our web content for this application. So here we are, and again we're going to need to use the same name that we specified in our dispatch from the, forwarding from the servlet. And we get a screen that is very similar to the HTML screen that we used when we created index.html. So we're again going to put in a title for the screen. And again, an H1 that will be visible on the screen. And you see it rendering up above as well. Now what we need to do is do a little bit of JSP maintenance here, if you will. And my typing here got a little bit away from me. But we are then going to simply tell it that this is a page that is going to generate Java, which makes sense, that the content type is going to be text HTML, and he even puts in the character set for me very nicely. And then finally, we're going to say that this is thread safe. And again, you'll notice, again, extensive use of content assist. And another key item is now we need to get access to the record class, the logon record, that was passed in via the set attribute on the request object. So we're saying useBean, the logon record, and that is of type class, and then within class you can simply type in close enough to logon record, he'll grab it and fill in all the gory details. A very important point here, well, other than missing that double quote again, a very important point here is creating this with the right scope, because by default the scope is only within the JSP, so it would not capture the object that was already populated outside. So we are saying that the scope is request, which means that if it did come in, we will definitely use it. And then all we need to do from there is use the fields here. So we're going to put in a little bit of text to surround our things, and beautiful Raleigh welcomes the new logon of, and then we are going to grab this name, and we're going to do that by accessing the logon rec and using content assist with the word get, and that gives us the get first name. We're going to put a little line break here just to put it on the next line. As you can tell, I'm not an artist per se. And your last logon was on, and we are then going to pull that also. These are items that were returned by the COBOL program into the COM area, and we're doing simple gets to retrieve them from the COM area. Again, not worried about encoding, not worried about the ASCII EBCDIC or bytecode or anything like that, and we are just going to pull that last login, and we're able to save that. Then we're going to export this as a WAR file. We could actually use CICS Explorer to move it up, but we're going to do it this way because it's the way we've been doing it for years. So we move the WAR file straight out to the root drive, and we are from there going to use what we call PSCP, or secure copy, secure remote copy, to move this WAR file up to our ZOS system. We're right now just putting it in the temp directory. So we input the password and the file should be sent. Now we're going up to our ZOS system. We're in the USS side at this point, and we are looking, and our drop-ins directory contains just our old control bank WAR file. So we're going to copy this temp logon wrapper WAR into our drop-ins directory, and then we're going to take a look at our logs, because it takes about 15 to 30 seconds for the polling in order to pick up this new application. And once we see that it has changed, and as of yet it has not, it's probably going to take, again, just seconds. We just probably are hitting the poll just wrong. We check again, and we are there. So now what we are going to do, since this log file is sitting in ASCII, we are going to convert it to EBCDIC so that we can read it, and then we're going to take a look at the last part of the file, which says that it deployed the application in 0.3 of a second, but it also, more importantly, gives us the URL that we need to hit from our browser in order to drive this program. So we're going to come back to our browser, and we're going to input that URL, and voila, we see that we are on the Raleigh logon page. So we are going to, in our case, we're going to go ahead and sign in user 19, who happens to also have password. We click the button, and what we see here is the correct logon results. The user happened to be named Eileen and was last logged in on July 19th, which is probably when I did a performance run and hit all the users. So this is done. This is a simple method by which we were able to web front end a CICS program. Now, a few things about if I were going to be making this program more production ready, I would bring the record classes into a separate package and use that only in JKICS, and the JKICS would communicate back via JavaBean or HashMap. I would keep a separation of the presentation and the logic, and the presentation could either be a servlet, as we've done here, or a REST interface, so that others could call it portal servers or what have you. The servlet would use a JSP to return the data, as we've done here, and the rest would use a JSON object. And the way I do that is with the Java beans, I create a to and a from JSON method so that they are so that the core logic doesn't need to worry about those levels of detail. And again, I would determine where CICS program logic should be driven from CICS and where it should be driven from Java, which may be dictated by the overall architecture of the program, but if I do drive it from Java, I'm probably going to want to use HTTP session or some other state mechanism. And I could use one servlet for many programs or one servlet per program. So I hope you've enjoyed our quick demo on putting a web front end on a CICS program, soup to nuts in under 20 minutes. Thank you very much.